Hey, good morning, families. Dr. Kyle here, coming to you live from the Michigan Family Wellness Clinic, and today we are doing our Thursday morning Facebook Live and Instagram Live webinar on the thyroid storm, everything that has to do with thyroid and autoimmune disease. We're going to go through an in-depth discussion of thyroid physiology. We're going to talk about how chiropractic adjustments relate to that and how we can leverage nutritional medicine, lifestyle choices, leverage our epigenetics to really elevate our thyroid health and how that plays into fatigue, thinning hair, gut issues, brain issues, weight management, all of these things. Thyroid physiology, thyroid health is a major deal, and there are many natural alternatives that are available to people as long as they have the knowledge and a good clinician to actually guide them through it. Because not every case is the same, not every case is simple and easy and cut and dry. You got to be very specific to your individual case to really get the best results. So give us a moment here to let everyone kind of jump on. We're going to start the other Instagram feed over here, and then we'll jump into our presentation for today. All right, start. Okay, so welcome to everyone over here on the Instagram live feed. We're going to be doing our thyroid presentation this morning. So if you want to see the slides along with this, jump on over to Facebook, look for the Michigan Family Wellness Radio group, and go ahead and jump in there, and you can see all of these great webinars that we do on Thursday mornings here. Thanks for being with us. All right, so let's get everything going on this end of it. I like to show you guys this view as well. Okay. So again, there's a lot to cover here, guys, and I want to make sure we get through it all in a timely manner, but then also being mindful that we're not going to get through everything all at once. And sometimes I find it's helpful to kind of put these things in part one and part two to have people be able to digest it better, pun intended. Because there's just so much information, it's difficult to assimilate and break down all at once. That being said, I think you guys can see my screen here. And what we'll do is do that for a second, but then we'll start over here. Let's see if I have the controls going. Perfect. All right, so everyone should be able to see that. Let me just double check. All right, so once again, so much to cover. We're going to try and get through about 20 to 25 frames here with Prezi. And again, if you guys want to learn more information about the clinic here and everything that we offer in terms of artful chiropractic adjustments and nutritional medicine, the podcast on your iPhone and Android is a great place to start. You can actually just search Michigan Family Wellness on your iPhone and your Android. We also have a weekly email list, and of course, MichiganFamilyWellness.com. The purpose of this frame here, everyone, is to just highlight that myself, I have done tons of postgraduate education in all of these topics, whether it's leaky brain, leaky gut, or the thyroid. There's a lot of information out there, which is a blessing and a curse, but I want you guys to know everything that we're going over is substantiated and founded upon in the literature. Okay, so this is not hocus pocus, this is not magic, things that are just kind of said with no support behind them. These are actual hard facts, and when we leverage those, we can really get the best results for the people in this community. Discovery consists in seeing what everybody else has seen and thinking what nobody else has thought. That is the 1937 Nobel Prize winner for the discovery of vitamin C, Albert St. Georgi, MD, PhD. All right, so this is a great segue into if you've done some thyroid testing before and you've basically all your lab tests come back normal, but you still have symptoms, you still feel terrible. It's probably because you have to look at more than just your TSH, T3, and T4, which is likely what your general practitioner, your primary care, ordered in terms of the standard thyroid panel. Okay, guys? There's so much more to look at and to consider, than just TSH, T3, and T4. By the way, those are hormones that the thyroid is signaled and produces, but we'll get into that as well once we jump into thyroid physiology. Another quote here, guys, from Dr. Karazian, one of my favorite authors. Thyroid hormones are responsible for the most basic and fundamental aspects of physiology. The thyroid is the central gear in the complex web of metabolism and is extremely sensitive to minor imbalances in other areas of physiology. An astute clinician should always ask what else is going wrong as a result and cause when they identify a thyroid imbalance. All right, so that kind of sets the framework for our discussion today. I like this frame here, rules of engagement. When you talk about thyroid physiology and thyroid dysfunction, again, you don't just want to look at the thyroid. You want to look at the brain, you want to look at the liver, the gut, the adrenals are very important. The pituitary, we're going to talk about the brain and how the pituitary plays in. Also the hypothalamus. Okay, so all of these wheels kind of turn together in this complex web, this complex cog. And when you only look at this very narrow segment, or you only look at the thyroid itself, you're missing the bigger picture. So that's what I want to drive home and communicate to you guys this morning. Does anyone feel like this? We're going to talk about more common symptoms, or basically experiences of people that have thyroid dysfunction, but these are the people that are always fatigued, that have hair, skin, and nail issues, a lot of mineral imbalances which cause hormonal imbalances. Difficulty sleeping, we mentioned weight management earlier because the thyroid is involved with metabolism. So this is often an illustration of people that have thyroid issues. Let me say this, the people that have the goiters, the enlarged thyroid glands, those are that's a pathological state of thyroid dysfunction. Those are caught very, very easily. What I'm focusing on are the people that don't necessarily have that huge thyroid, those huge goiters, but they still have the symptoms, and they're very frustrated when they go to their MDs and they do their lab tests, they come back normal, and then their doc says, look, your lab tests are normal, you should be fine, and they kind of brush them off, but this patient is still having issues. Let's go through some more symptoms. Fatigue, cold hands and cold feet all the time, low basal body temperature, dry skin, edema or swelling of the extremities or tissues. The goiter, the elevated T3 will cause the goiter, hair loss and thinning. The throat tickles constantly, okay? So that's, when you're trying to swallow, maybe you have difficulty swallowing your food or swallowing supplements or swallowing your medicine. That can be caused from an enlarged thyroid dysfunction. Hair loss around the eyebrows, that is classic thyroid textbook symptom there, hypothyroid. Inability to lose weight along with that weight management we talked about earlier. Having a tendency to get emotional or cry very easily. I've seen that in clinical practice. Poor memory, heart palpitations or a racing heartbeat, hypertension or hypotension. Macroglossia, okay, periorbital edema, we mentioned that earlier. Okay, that's that enlarged tongue, that macroglossia that we mentioned earlier. Macroglossia, enlarged tongue, puffy face, sluggish reflexes. Again, classic hypothyroid symptom there. They've actually measured this with the light time gate sensors, the Achilles tendon reflex, the sluggish reflexes. They determine that a sluggish or a low thyroid dysfunctional state will cause sluggish reflexes there, so you can determine that on physical exam. Disruption in sleep, depression or low mood, cracked heels. So I've noticed this on my patients that have low thyroid. They'll have the skin on their heels will be cracked essentially. They'll have a hard time maintaining good skin health, good moisturized skin on their heels there. Brittle hair, breaking easily, brittle hair. Crepey skin, weathered look, that kind of goes along with the cracked heels a little bit. And just nervous or anxious very frequently. Okay? So I want everyone to really recognize that if this sounds like you are not alone. There is so much, I would say, undiagnosed thyroid issues because, again, most of these MDs, most of these physicians, they aren't testing a broader picture. They're only looking at the TSH, the T3, and the T4. An estimated 20 million Americans have some form of thyroid disease, thyroid dysfunction, thyroiditis. Okay? Up to 60% of those with thyroid disease are unaware of their condition. Again, that goes back to the lack of good clinical diagnostic testing. Undiagnosed thyroid disease may increase the likelihood of certain conditions such as cardiovascular diseases, osteoporosis, and even infertility. Because again, those thyroid hormones, T3, the T4, all of that, they play into our metabolism, they play into our endocrine cycle, our reproductive health. So this is a big deal. Women especially are 5 to 8 times more likely than men to have thyroid problems. Pregnant women with inadequately treated hypothyroidism have an increased risk of birth complications. And the stark reality of these statements here, everyone, are these are actually a little bit dated. Okay, here we are in 2017. These numbers are essentially probably 2 or 3 years old by now. I do need to update a little bit of these things. But the point is, again, if you feel like any of the symptoms that we've talked about so far, recognize that you are not alone, hope abounds, and that there are answers and solutions available to you. That being said, what do we do clinically? What do we do practically to really identify this? It always starts with a physical exam. There are so many physicians, so many clinicians that neglect the thyroid exam. So I do want to draw your attention to this diagram over here on the left-hand side of the frame. This is helping you identify and locate the thyroid gland. So a little bit of anatomy here as we get started. This is a front-facing view of your throat, okay? So do me a favor, take your hands. Can you find your collarbones, or your clavicles as we call them in anatomy? Go right above your clavicles and you'll probably bump into this kind of spongy feeling tissue. That is your thyroid. If you go too high, you're going to find your hyoid bone, you're going to find your thyroid cartilage. That's a little bit too high, but you can actually feel your thyroid gland, the right and the left lobes, and then if you're really fancy, you can feel what's called the isthmus. All right, the isthmus. Say that 5 times fast. All right, so the isthmus is that little piece of connective tissue bridging the right and left lobes. Practically speaking, what I'm looking for clinically here in the office is an enlargement. I'm looking for symmetry. So if one side is larger than the other, or one side is notably smaller than the other, that's what you want to notate, because this can lead to further diagnostic imaging. Okay. Classically, back in the day, they did radioactive iodine imaging with X-ray. I don't like to advise that route today for patients because we don't want to expose our tissues to any unnecessary radiation. So I highly recommend, if there's a thyroid concern, to follow up with diagnostic imaging with specifically diagnostic ultrasound, because that'll give you a good visual of the tissue itself. Moving on from the thyroid exam, let's jump into our physiology. So we started with our anatomy. Now let's get more context about the physiology. Okay? So here's the thing. Like I have said repeatedly in this presentation so far, medical doctors and physicians are often only looking at what's inside of this circle right here highlighted. Okay, so we have the thyroid. Let's see if we can zoom in on this. We're going to actually back up here for a second, but let's just zoom in right here for a moment. Okay, here is your thyroid gland, and here is your T3 and your T4, and the TSH is coming down from the brain, from the pituitary. Okay, so here's the thing. Medical doctors and physicians, they're only looking at the TSH value, the T3, and the T4, because those are the most easily measurable hormones in circulation. Okay, the reality is you have to look upstream if you're noticing issues in the thyroid itself. So where does the thyroid get its signals from? So thyroid metabolism actually starts in our brain. Okay, so if I have someone that's not sleeping well, or that has brain fog or trouble concentrating, trouble with fatigue, mental fatigue, if they're reading a book or something and they get tired, that is a cognitive issue. Okay, so it actually starts when the hypothalamus, this is a part of the brain deep within our limbic center, if you will, the hypothalamus sends TRH, or thyroid releasing hormone, to the pituitary. Okay, so first step is hypothalamus to the pituitary with thyroid releasing hormone, or TRH. Okay, that's step one. Step two, the pituitary gland receives that hormone signal and then releases thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, to signal the thyroid. Okay, so step one, pituitary sends TRH, the hypothalamus, see, this gets confusing, this is why it's so complicated. The hypothalamus sends TRH to the pituitary, all right? The pituitary receives that signal and sends TSH to the thyroid, all right? So maybe you're asking yourself, all right, Dr. Kyle, well, how do we measure thyroid releasing hormone, the hypothalamus to the pituitary? And the reality is, we don't have a good way to measure that right now. That's really within brain circulation, and it's very difficult with our current technologies to measure that. We don't have a lot of TRH in systemic circulation. It's more of a brain circulation that we're just not practically able to measure a lot right now. That being said, so now we're at the pituitary gland releases thyroid stimulating hormone to the thyroid gland. So finally we get to here. So there's two big steps before we even get to the thyroid, okay? Then the thyroid produces T3 and T4 hormones, okay? So there's your T3 and your T4. Here's the conundrum, if you will. Our body, our metabolism burns with T3, okay? So we need T3, we need a lot of T3 to have a good, fiery metabolism. The conundrum is our thyroid naturally produces more T4 than T3. So can you see the percentages here? 93% of what your thyroid kicks out is T4, all right? 7% is T3. So maybe you're asking yourselves, what does the T3 and the T4 mean? Like, what are those numbers, okay? Those numbers represent the number of iodine molecules attached to the tyrosine chain, okay, the T chain, all right? So in T3, there's 3 molecules of iodine. In T4, there's 4 molecules of iodine, okay? So before we get into iodine, let's just briefly talk about how we need to, so there's our iodine, we need to convert T4 into T3, all right, so that our body can use the T3. Where does that conversion happen? How does it happen? Most of it happens in the liver. Thank God for our liver. It does everything, and it regenerates. It grows back, okay? So 60% of T4 is converted to T3 in the liver via the enzyme 5'-deiodinase. Okay, so deiodinase, that's taking an iodine molecule off of T4, and then you have lovely T3. Okay? So even with that, part of that goes into reverse T3, which is inactive. Part of that goes to T3S, also inactive. Okay, and there's remaining T4 that's converted to T3 in the peripheral tissues. Okay? T3, those other inactive forms of T3 can be converted into active T3 in our gut. But guess what? If our gut is inflamed, if we have leaky gut, then that whole conversion process can be compromised. So the whole goal with all of this is, if I were to back up, here's that 30,000 foot view. We have all these steps and we're trying to make T3. Okay, so there's some complexity here. There's a lot involved just to get this one hormone, T3. Now, let's go back to iodine. hang with me here with the Prezi. So let's circle back to iodine real quick, and I know we're talking through a lot here, but hang with me if you're still tracking. So iodine, okay, our thyroid needs iodine. That's a necessary mineral, a necessary nutrient to make T4 and T3, like we talked about. You got to have enough iodine. The trouble is, many of us, if you're listening, we live in Michigan, which is the goiter belt, okay? The Great Lakes were formed by ice-sheet glaciers that came through and carved through the Great Lakes, and they stripped away a lot of the iodine from the soil. And if it's not in the soil, that means it's not in our food. And if it's not in our food that we eat, then where are we getting it, okay? So one thing we can do clinically is we can actually test iodine levels with liquid iodine. Okay, so what we do often in the office, this is called the iodine patch test. Again, very substantiated in the literature as a good subjective, objective-ish test. All right, but you can actually make a small patch on your arm of iodine, and you can observe how long it takes for that iodine patch to be absorbed into the skin. Okay? What I see clinically most oftentimes is that that patch of iodine absorbs very quickly because so many people are deficient in iodine. Okay? So here's the thing. Let's say that patch absorbs very quickly and all of your tests indicate that your thyroid is sluggish. Okay? So maybe you're thinking, all right, well, that's an easy fix. I'll just start supplementing with iodine. Okay? Not a bad clinical thought, all right? But here's the kicker. Here's the thing. When you look at the pathophysiology of Hashimoto's, you have to consider the immune system component of thyroid dysfunction, okay? The reason that I do not just put anyone and everyone on iodine is because iodine is necessary to make what's called TPO, thyroid peroxidase, okay? Iodine supplementation will drive thyroid peroxidase activity, okay? And if our immune system is attacking this enzyme, thyroid peroxidase, then, as you can probably understand, you could be making yourself worse, or your clinician could be making you worse by giving you supplemental iodine if your immune system is already attacking your thyroid. Okay, so let me say that one more time because that is a huge take-home point. Iodine is not always the answer. You need to know if you have any sort of antibodies to your thyroid, because if you do, then iodine will make you worse. It's like putting fire on the flame. All right, it's putting gasoline on the flame. Okay. Now, if you don't have those antibodies, then you're in the green. Iodine supplementation or looking for other sources of iodine in your food, seaweed, kelp, all these green vegetables, very, very good clinical consideration. All right. But again, hear me very clearly. You don't want to supplement with iodine if you have a large presence, lab out of range of the TPO antibodies. All right, that's a major take-home point for today. All right, any questions so far? Brilliant. So again, just another representation here. Hypothalamus releasing thyroid-releasing hormone to the pituitary. The pituitary releases thyroid-stimulating hormone to the thyroid. The thyroid kicks out T3 and T4. Most of that's T4. That goes to the liver for conversion and is kicked out into T3, both active and inactive forms. And then we have downstream conversion in the gut as well. So all of this to convert the prized T3. Okay? If you're a fan of the movies like myself, then maybe you've seen Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. So just some comic relief for us here. All right, so kind of rounding out our discussion for today, we're going to do a part 2 of this next week, actually. Here is our T3 hormone, just a representation of it here. And just another illustration of how there's 4 iodine molecules on thyroxine T4. There's 3 iodine, okay, on triiodothyronine. And here is your reverse T3, which is inactive. That's just a different conformation, a different stereoisomer of the active form of T3. Okay? A little bit about, so you noticed, okay, if you notice back here, tyrosine. Tyrosine is an amino acid, all right? So we need the tyrosine backbone to form those thyroid hormones. So you got to be getting good sources of plant or of protein, essentially. And right now I'm thinking all about plant sources of protein because I just watched that documentary, What the Health, and let's just be honest, the animal protein that we produce here in the U.S. is not the best. It's not the greatest. So if you have Netflix, I highly recommend checking out the What the Health documentary. But going back to our frame here, the tyrosine backbone comes from protein, so we got to eat, digest, and absorb good quality protein. Which brings me to another point. If you're having stomach issues, okay, your stomach produces hydrochloric acid, okay? If you're eating good sources of protein, you got to be able to break down that protein into those amino acids, so you need good stomach acid. But if we're always stressed out, if we're going and never resting, our stomach is not going to produce any hydrochloric acid if we're always in a stressed out state. Which brings me back to chiropractic adjustments. Chiropractic adjustments help modulate the parasympathetic nervous system to help you calm down so you can produce stomach acid, so that you can digest the protein and break it down so that you can make thyroid hormones. So there's your connection. So just a funny illustration here about thyroid, the Fukushima radiated genetically modified salmon. Yes. So just a little bit of comic relief there again. All right, so here's more of our talk about iodine, and everyone, this is where I would like to pause our discussion for this morning. I want to pick back up here actually next week and continue our thyroid discussion. We're going to jump into more about iodine here. I alluded to this a little bit with living in Michigan here, but this is a great place to really just kind of pause and hang out here for a moment. I really encourage you guys to check back in with us next week. We're going to go through a lot of the practical applications, the clinical applications of a lot of the anatomy and the physiology that we talked about this morning. And again, I like to keep these around 25-30 minutes so that people can kind of watch them and mentally absorb everything that we're talking about, because there is a lot to go over here. So thanks so much, families. I really appreciate your time this morning, and please reach out with any questions. If you want to post something underneath the comments here in the Facebook Live feed, or if you want to send me a message on Instagram, please reach out. That's what makes these discussions most relevant and powerful, is when we can actually have feedback and follow up with people's real-life questions or real-life issues. And I'll just say one more thing as well. If your medical doctor is not doing more advanced testing, if they're only looking at TSH, T3, and T4, please contact me, because as a Michigan State licensed chiropractor, what I have is called an NPI number, which allows me to create the physician requisitions for much more advanced and specific testing. It's oftentimes cheaper and with less wait time as well than a lot of the standard panels and the standard ways of doing things through the allopathic or the medical model. So if that interests you at all, or if you know someone who may be interested in that, please, again, send me a message, put a little comment below the video here. Thanks so much for your time, families. Have an awesome holiday Labor Day weekend, and we will talk to you soon.